you, Sandy. And a huge thank you to Michelle as well for doing a wonderful presentation before me. I hope that I can follow up after her. It was just so beautifully done. I also want to thank everybody for being here. I'm so grateful to be able to speak with all of you today. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about some of those foundational pieces of the house that Michelle spoke about. So those joint attention pieces and that total communication piece. So I will pull up my slides. So as Sandy mentioned, I'm talking about targeting joint attention and total communication for pre-linguistic students. So let's talk about pre-linguistic. What that means kind of goes back to what Michelle said. Those non-language pieces, pre-language skills, are the ways in which we communicate without using words. So some of examples of those are joint attention, eye contact, gestures, facial expressions, imitations of actions, gestures, and or words. So that's imitating what we're doing as well. So you probably all recognize this house. Michelle went over it so beautifully. I'm going to focus specifically first on that bottom piece, that foundation of language that begins with joint attention. Joint attention is the ability to share a common focus on something with somebody else. That focus could be another person. It could be an object of interest. It could be a concept. It could be an event that's happening around us. It's just the ability to share our attention with that same object as somebody else. So I'm going to just show a quick visual of two people or faces sharing eye gaze and also sharing attention with that bowl. So they are attending together to that object. Some skills needed from our pre-linguistic students to target joint attention are things such as being able to attend or orient to another person, being able to shift their eye gaze between a person and an object, being able to follow the eye gaze of or point of another person. So if I was to point over here, I would hope and look for my student to be able to follow that point to where I'm pointing to. Another skill would be to draw attention to an object for the purpose of shared experience. So a student would be looking to bring me into their experience, draw me in, whether that's pulling me in or pointing towards it, getting me interested in what they're looking at. So I know some of you might be asking, what if I don't see these skills yet? What could I do to target some of these skills in my pre-linguistic students? So I was hoping to break it down into some things we can do at home, things we don't have to be in a classroom to do, we can work on in our own environment. So one of those pieces is mealtime. How do we target joint attention at mealtime, right? Well, we could offer that child a choice. Let's say we're offering them breakfast, whether that be a mango or some water. By offering them a choice, giving them pause and waiting 10 to 15 seconds, we can help that child build their joint attention skills. We would start by expecting something little, something small from them, maybe even just an eye gaze towards the object they're looking for. So if I'm holding out two objects, a mango and some water, and my student wants that mango, my hope at first would be that they would be able to look towards me, towards the hand in which my mango's in. Then we might build on that, and I'll talk about how to do that in some other slides, but we'd build on that and look for a little bit more, maybe a point or a vocalization from them that would indicate that they're looking for the mango versus the water. Another activity we can target joint attention at home with is books. Reading books with children is a great way to build that shared experience. Because while we read books, we do it naturally. We point to pictures, we label objects while we're reading. We're talking about a shared experience together. So again, we want to pause and wait for the child to build some of these skills on their own. We want them to follow our point to the pictures or look at the same picture as us. The great thing about books is that we're doing it together already. That you can target joint attention is using a ball. And this is one of my favorite activities because I get to clear my entire room. It's just me and a child sitting on the floor. And we're sitting up from each other, throwing a ball back and forth. And what I'm doing is holding the ball and waiting for their eye contact at me. I'm waiting for them to look at me before I throw it back. And that's my stepping stone to building that joint attention. As we grow in that activity and as we develop together, I would be looking for a little bit more. Maybe then I would look for a gesture that they wanted, and then build into that a little bit more. But when I start, that stepping stone is just them looking up at me before I throw that ball. And like I said, it's one of my favorite activities to do with students because it's just us and one object. And I really just get to play with them and be with them, and it's exciting. The next foundational skill, one of the walls of that house that Michelle spoke about, is nonverbal communication. That's that communication that we use that doesn't have a language to it yet. It can. We can have gestures associated with a formal sign language, like American Sign Language or Kenya Sign Language. But some children can just use gestures that aren't associated with that formal language. They can use that eye gaze that we've been talking about. They can use facial expressions to tell us that they're happy or tell us that they're sad. And these are all pieces that help them communicate with us without using verbal language, without speaking words. And I know it can be tough because when we're working with students or children, we want them to use language and we want them to use words, but sometimes we have to back it up and look at just those smaller pieces, those communicative attempts that are there, but it might take us a little bit longer to find them, to understand those pieces of the children. So some examples of nonverbal communication with young students might be pushing away something when they're done with it. So they're playing a ball with you and then they push it away from you. They're telling you communicatively that they are done. That is a protest. That's a functional piece of communication, even if that language isn't there. Another example of a gesture might be showing an object to us. So showing us their favorite toy or showing us a book they want us to read. Some other gestures would be giving an object to a communication partner, pointing, following a communication partner's point, or even waving. Some ways that we can increase these communicative gestures or communicative moments that happen without language are in 3 steps: to exaggerate our use of nonverbal communication, to imitate the child's use of nonverbal communication, and to add our own verbal language and vocalize on top of it. So what I mean by that, I'm going to talk about a student of mine. Let's call him Andy. So Andy starts with me, and I notice that every time he wants to be picked up, he puts his hands up to the sky. That's a great use of nonverbal communication. So I'm going to start by exaggerating my nonverbal communication by also putting my hands up. I'm going to imitate his and put my hands up as well. But then I'm going to vocalize with it. I'm going to say up. I want to come up when I say that. And so I'm going to build on those skills in my student together. Some strategies that we can use to help develop these nonverbal communication skills are wait time. So as I mentioned previously, by pausing and waiting for a child to provide a response, we are really showing them that they have power, that what they're doing, what their use of communication is, whether it's nonverbal or verbal, that it's powerful. So by waiting for them to give us a response, we are putting power in their shoes. And by increasing our wait time and increasing what we are expecting from them, we're going to help nonverbal communication develop. So by that, I mean, we're going to start small and wait 3 seconds. We're going to build that up to maybe 15 seconds. And we're going to start small with what we expect by looking for maybe eye gaze, and then build that up to a point, and then build that up to something a little bit deeper, like a gesture, and then a gesture used in a formal language, like a sign, like more. So we're going to build on this wait time and help children see that they have power in their communication, even if that communication doesn't have words associated with it. Another strategy is what's called sabotage. And I know that sounds like a scary word, but what it really is just sabotaging an environment to give children the opportunity to communicate with us. So we're going to put a desired item out of their reach. Let's say I know my friend Andy loves playing with a book. It's his favorite toy. I'm going to take that object and I'm going to put it out of his reach so that it creates an opportunity for him to ask me for it, for him to communicate with me that he wants that book, even though I know he wants that book. And again, I'm going to build on that by using wait time, by imitating what he's doing, and by focusing on his nonverbal communication first and building from there. So for example, I started with a student who every time he wanted an object from me, he would cry. And we've worked a long time together and we've built it up. And now he uses his own gesture to tell me that it's mine. He says, it's mine and I want it. And this has worked very well for us because now he has a way to communicate with more than just me. A lot of people understand this gesture, at least as an American Sign Language gesture, that it's mine and I want it. And another strategy that I've talked about a little bit before was imitating. So imitating what the child does and building on that. So as an example, if a child points to a cup, I would also point to that cup and say, cup, I want the cup, before I give them the cup. So after we build on nonverbal communication, we can bring in what's called a total communication approach. This is going to kind of meld or mold together those areas of language that Michelle talked about so beautiful. So the language and the non-language piece, we're going to kind of form them, put them together, and work within them to build language or communication in our students. So a total communication approach is an approach that utilizes a variety of communication modalities to promote functional skills in our students and children. So some of these modalities are going to be joint attention, are going to be nonverbal communication, and then we're going to build into that and bring in a formalized sign language, some pictures and objects, AAC, which Michelle briefly spoke about, that alternative augmentative communication devices, and then verbal communication. We're going to combine all of these together. In my talk, I'm going to speak specifically to sign language and pictures and objects, and then after me, Amanda is going to speak a little bit more about those AAC pieces. So our goal when using a total communication approach is for the child to independently communicate with us and with others, even if he or she is unable to speak at the moment. So just to build a little bit more on those levels of total communication, as I mentioned, joint attention is the foundation of language. It's that shared eye gaze between a communication partner, a student, or a child and an object or event. Nonverbal communication are gestures and body language used by the child to communicate their wants and needs. These might look like, again, pointing to an object, lifting hands to be picked up, or bringing an adult an object that they want. Then we can build on that by using a formalized sign language. This can be used as a communication tool for early communication skills. It can be modeled and facilitated by that communication partner. So whether it's a speech pathologist or a teacher or a parent, we can model that and increase the exposure of language, verbal language, signed language, and then even pictures, which also are a different set of language. So that object, picture, symbols can also be used as a communication tool for early communication skills. We can start by pointing and tapping a single picture, and then build more into more advanced picture boards and AAC devices, which Amanda will discuss in more detail a little bit later. And then verbal language. So when using a total communication approach and when working with students who haven't yet developed speech or language of their own, as the communication partner, we are going to always be using our verbal language. We're going to model this in conjunction with the use of our other communicative tools. And then if used by the child, we're going to expand on that and help them build and grow in their use of verbal language as well. So let's first talk about facilitating sign language. And as I am aware, there's many formal sign language. There's American Sign Language, there's Kenyan Sign Language, there's, I believe, a Ghana Sign Language. And I'm going to be modeling some examples of American Sign Language, but the use of facilitating this is going to be the same for all students. So first we want to find functional words in our environment. What I mean by functional is I mean that those are the words that are going to do the most for that student. It's going to be a request like eat or drink or play, things that are really motivating for them. So for example, one that I work on a lot is want in American Sign Language. And this is because it's so functional, because we can use want in a mealtime, we can use want in a moment of play, we can use want in a moment of frustration because they don't want it. And to facilitate this best, it works better with two facilitators and a student. And what I mean by this is two adults helping a communicative moment and then one student. This is not always possible, and I understand that. Believe me, I have been with many students, just me and them, in which I'm helping facilitate this use of total communication, this signed language. But best practice is the use of two facilitators. How we would begin is have somebody behind a student and somebody in front of the student as the communication partner. And then as the person behind them, I would start with hand over hand support to help them model that sign. So I would have my hands directly over theirs and help them pull their hands towards their body for want. So I'm helping them use that signed language in that moment of communication, while the other facilitator is withholding that object that they do want. And when they give them that communications signal, that sign, that facilitator hands the object over to them. We would slowly reduce support to build independence in this communicative attempt. By that, I mean that I would start with my hands directly over a child and move them to their elbows, to then help them move their elbows into the want position. Then I would move to a light touch where they're practically doing it on their own, but I'm just helping facilitate. And then I would reduce my support as needed until that communicative experience is independent for them. They are telling me that they want an object all on their own. And something I just like to say and talk about is that this can take time. It's not always something that can happen immediately. I've had children that I can reduce my support and they're independent within weeks. And I've had children where it's taken me over a year to work on a specific signed communicative attempt. And I think that can be hard. It can be hard for me as a therapist. I know that it can be hard for my parents. I know that it can be hard for the teachers that I work really close with. But every child develops differently, and our goal is to help them use language the best possible way that we can. Even if sometimes that means that we work on the same communicative request over and over and over again for a year or more or less. But it can be hard, the time that this might take. The next piece in total communication that I want to talk about is using pictures or objects. So as Amanda is going to talk about, and as Michelle talked about a little bit, there are more developed AAC options out there. There's tech ones, there's core boards. What I'm talking about is just using single pictures and single objects to build on pre-linguistic skills before using a larger core board or AAC device. So again, we would start by finding functional words in a child's environment, whether that's to eat or sleep or go outside or use the bathroom. Then you would create a corresponding picture for the functional word. So this is an example on my screen of one that I've used recently with a child. That child that I work with is able or does have the receptive understanding to connect a picture of a toilet to the bathroom, but sometimes using real pictures can be a little bit easier for children. So just finding a picture that corresponds to the word you're looking for. Then as the communicative partner, we're going to model the use of that picture. If I'm looking for the child to tell me that they want to eat, I'm going to tap that picture of eat first. And then I'm going to help support them in their communication as well. And we're going to build it. So I'm going to start by maybe a small gesture toward the picture. And then maybe the child taps the picture next and then points to the picture and then brings the picture to you. So we're going to build in a hierarchy and help support them, whether that's by hand over hand support or modeling. We're going to help them connect with these pictures and use them as a communicative tool in areas in which they don't have language. And as an aside, we're always going to add that verbal language to the child's use of the picture system. So if a child brings me the picture of food, we're going to verbalize eat. I want to eat. We're going to give them that that verbal communication on top of their nonverbal communicative gesture. Verbal language strategies we can use within a total communication approach. I'm going to talk about these, and then I'm going to show a quick video in which I model some of these over top of a child playing. So I'm going to talk first about parallel talk. This is a verbal language strategy that we can use as a communicative partner in which we're narrating what the child is doing. So if a child is cleaning up their toys, I would use an I statement or remain object focused. So I would either talk about I as if I was their voice or talk about the object that they're picking up. So I might say, I am cleaning up. Or if a child is eating, I would say, I am eating bread. If a child is playing with cars, I might say the car is going fast. Fast. The car is going fast. I would parallel my voice to what they're doing. Another strategy we can do is what's called self-talk. So I would narrate what I'm doing. For example, I would say blowing bubbles or cleaning up or playing with the ball. So I would narrate what I'm doing and what the child's doing. Another language strategy we can use is model, in which we model what we want the child to say. And I've been kind of touching on this throughout the entire presentation, in which I've been talking about adding our voice and our modeled language to these non-communicative gestures. So if I know a child, wants the cookie by pointing to the cookie, I'm going to model what I want them to say by saying, I want the cookie. Another verbal language strategy we can do is called language stimulation, in which we repeat the same words during play to encourage the language. We do this because a child needs exposure to a single word greater than 250 times before it's able to be in their repertoire. So if I'm in an activity with a child, I might model the word eat many times during an activity. And I would choose that as my language of use during that activity. And I would say, I am eating, eat. I want to eat. I am eating bread. I am eating bread with butter. I am eating a cookie. I would repeat this word multiple times within an activity. The final language strategy that I'm going to touch on is called expansion. So I'm going to repeat what the child says, signs, chooses as a picture, and expand on that utterance. So for example, if a child signed want after we had been working on, and I knew they wanted the door open, I would expand on that statement and say, want. I want the door open. So I would use my voice to expand on what their request was. And I am going to next show a quick clip, and I'm going to demonstrate parallel talk, in which I'm narrating what the child is doing in this video. So I will quickly play it. So I would say, the square goes in, the square goes in. I'm looking for the puzzle piece. I'm looking. I found it. I found the puzzle piece. I put it in. The circle goes in. So in that demonstration, I am looking to narrate what that child is doing. I am parallel talking. I am using language to talk about them. The reason that I speak in I statements for something that I'm not doing is that we are looking to build the child's language and not mine. And so I am using my voice as their voice. And that's why I'm narrating in I statements or in third person or object statements, in which I say the puzzle piece goes in. So that is the reason behind it.